Hello, 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 hello. Good morning, good evening, everyone. Welcome to JPS Online Tutors. Today, by God's grace, we'll be looking at basic ethical issues in taxation. And you see, it's like if we're talking about ethical issues in taxation, taxation is a profession. So as a profession, we have, some ethical issues. Just like, we have, in any other profession like accounting, and the rest. So for it being an integral, part of accounting or economics, so it's like, there are some basic, ethical issues that we as students, that as we are preparing for ICAN professional exams, we need to, acquaint ourselves, with these ethical issues because ICAN for ICAN, as professional exam is like, they like testing, ethical issues. Because, the most important thing as a professional is just, for us, to adhere and abide, by the profession code of ethics. Like if we take, the Institute of Chartered Accountant of Nigeria, the Association of National Accountant of Nigeria, if we take, the Nigerian Bar Association, if you take Nigerian, Society of, Engineers, the Institute of, let's say, Chartered Institute of Taxation, all these are professional bodies. So, of which, as a profession, they all have code of ethics. So, the same thing, taxation as a profession, we have code of ethics. So, of which, those code of ethics are expected to be abide by both tax practitioners and taxpayers. So, whether you are a taxpayer or you are a tax practitioner, you must comply, you must adhere, you must strictly adhere to those code of ethics. So of which, later, as we're discussing, on this topic, we'll get to know, about those, basic ethics, basic ethics, and other ethical issues, in taxation in Nigeria. So let us quickly look at, the introduction, of this chapter. The ethics in taxation, it refers to moral principles and standard of behavior. So whenever, we're talking about, ethics, it's like, we're just talking about moral principles and the standard of behavior. And once, somebody is morally sound, so it's like, that person it is believed that, that person can distinguish, between what is right and what is wrong. So it is that ability, of distinguishing, between what is right and wrong. That is, what distinguish, between a professional and a quack. So even, when it comes to, the way, we do our things, you understand, we, the professionals, it's like that's how, we normally distinguish ourselves, from the quack that just maybe learned, from the streets, you understand? So they are not, well trained, you understand, as we, we have undergone, a rigorous training, you understand? So that is, the ethics. So, and that's why, they said it refers to moral principle and the standard of behavior that guide both taxpayers and tax practitioners in fulfilling their obligation. In fulfilling their obligation. It's like this obligation, that we're talking about. So it's like if you take, what the taxpayer first, the taxpayer is having an obligation, as in maybe to pay taxes to the government because paying tax, to the government as a taxpayer is your civic responsibility. So paying that tax, to the government, you understand? So that is the obligation that the taxpayer is expected to fulfill. So the same thing, with the tax practitioner, you too, as you have taken, what, oaths, before, you have been inducted, before, you have been, admitted, into the noble profession, of taxation through the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria. So I know definitely you have, this obligation, isn't it? To properly, as in, guide, your client, on how to comply, with the tax laws. And you shouldn't, help them, in compromising, when it comes to payment, of the tax. So it's like, you serve, as a guide, to those taxpayers to make sure that, they always do the right thing. So that is, your obligation as a tax practitioner. Since taxation is crucial for national development, ethical conduct is essential to ensure fairness, transparency, and trust in the tax system. So the next thing we'll be looking at is the meaning of ethics. Meaning of ethics. Meaning of ethics. So when we're talking about the ethics, like I said, it is an ability to differentiate between what is right and wrong, conduct in human behavior. In taxation, ethics emphasizes compliance with tax laws and then honesty in reporting income and avoiding fraudulent practices. So that is, what the ethics, we're talking about. So you as a taxpayer, you are expected to comply, with the tax laws and regulation. And also be honest while reporting the income for tax purposes, and also to avoid any fraudulent, practices that will make you evade tax or that will make you pay a lesser amount as what as a tax. So that is, what the ethics it entails. So let's quickly look at, the importance of ethics in taxation. Number one, it ensures public confidence in tax system. So with the strong ethics, in place, so it's like that, it will really, ensure public confidence, in the tax system. The taxpayers will now build a kind of, trust, in the government. They will have, they will have, the confidence, in the tax system, because, they know whatever amount, they paid, as a tax. So it's like the government will properly account for it, and they will equally see, the impact, of the tax. So, and then the next one is promote, voluntary compliance. So with the strong, ethics in taxation, it will also promote voluntary compliance. So as if you could recall, in Nigeria, there was a time, a tax amnesty was introduced. I think, we have about two different schemes, of which, one, was introduced in 2017, while the other one was introduced in 2018. So the one that was introduced in 2018, it's titled VATE, that is Voluntary Asset and Income Declaration Scheme, which allow the tax defaulters to come and declare their income voluntarily. So with that voluntary compliance, so it's like the government have decided to waive them from any form of penalty or interest, but they will only be asked to pay or to settle the tax due without the finality and without the interest. So it promotes that voluntary compliance. And then the next one is it helps in curbing tax evasion and tax avoidance. So of which this tax evasion and tax avoidance, it became one of the major challenge of tax administration in Nigeria, or let me say not even in Nigeria, maybe globally, isn't it? So we can only say that maybe in countries like, Nigeria, it is severe as compared to, with other developed economies. So of which, is like the level of compliance there, is very, very encouraging as compared to, with the level of compliance, in the developing economies like Nigeria. So this, ethics is like it helps, curbing or stopping tax evasion and avoidance. And then the next one, it protects the reputation of tax practitioner. So you as a practitioner, if you adhere strictly to the code of ethics, it's like that will really help you in protecting, your image, as a practitioner, and also, protect, your reputation as a tax practitioner. So with that, reputation, you have, So that will really help you to even, what, expand, your client base. So of which, through that kind of interaction, you have with your client, with the excellent, services you do provide, to them. So in that case, they might even recommend you, you know, to, other clients. So, and another thing is it encourages accountability. It encourages accountability and transparency in government revenue administration. So with the strong, ethics in taxation. So it will encourages, the compliance, from the taxpayers. Let's quickly look at, some ethical issues that surrounded, Nigerian taxation or maybe Nigerian tax system, per se. The first one is tax evasion and tax avoidance. So of which, if we're talking about tax evasion and tax avoidance, like I said earlier, it became one of the major challenges. It became one of the major challenges. So it became, one of the major challenges, in tax administration in Nigeria, because if you're talking about tax evasion, that one, like you said, it is illegal, while, the tax avoidance is legal. Because talking about tax evasion is like it is deliberate, refusing, to pay tax or evade, tax completely, isn't it? Maybe by manipulating, you know, the record by falsifying, the record. So of which, like we said, it is a criminal offense, as in maybe for the taxpayer, as in to engages, in tax evasion. But for the tax avoidance, that one is by illegal means. It is by illegal means. So of which, the taxpayer might now take advantage, of the loopholes, that exist, in our tax laws, of which, because sometimes, the tax laws, might allow, the taxpayer and then maybe to claim, for some incentives, like, for the capital allowance, and the rest. So we have, things like this. So of which, claiming that, for you as a taxpayer, for you to pay a lesser amount, as a tax, so it is not a crime. So once, the tax law, you can take that advantage, to identify, those, loopholes, and you just, what, take those advantage, and you end up paying, what, a lesser amount, as well as a tax. So that one, is not a crime. And even though sometimes it may raise, what, ethical, question or concern. And then the tax evasion, like we said, it is illegal act of deliberately refusing to pay tax, maybe through fraud, underreporting or falsification. And then for the tax avoidance, it has to do with the arranging appears, that is by a taxpayer, by a legal means to minimize tax liability, though it may raise ethical questions. So that is avoidance for you. And then the second ethical issue we have is corruption in tax administration. So you see, it's like this corruption, it's like it can be found, among, the tax officials, because sometimes they do compromise. So what they're supposed to, as they maybe remit to the government, they don't actually, what, remit it. So they do compromise it, you understand? So there is a kind of, bravery, the tax official can be brave, by the taxpayers, so that the amount, of tax liability will be reduced. And then another, form of corruption is diversion of collected revenue. Sometimes the tax official, they do not properly account, for what they have, they have collected, as what, as revenue. They don't properly, what, account for it. So that diversion of collected revenue, even though with this technological advancement, we have like maybe adopting this e-filing by the relevant tax authorities, e-payment. So it's like it drastically, as in maybe it helps, in blocking, revenue leakages. Because as a taxpayer, it's like, you are not being encouraged as in maybe to pay cash to any tax official. So any amount, that you want to pay as a tax, so you have to use, e-payments, as a platform to make such payment. So the taxpayers are not being encouraged as to pay cash, as a tax, to the government. So with this technological advancement, like I said, it helps, in addressing this issue of diversion of collected revenue. So another challenge that we'll be looking at, or maybe ethical issue, is lack of transparency and accountability. Lack of transparency and accountability. And how does this lack of transparency and accountability emanate? Number one, by obvious mismanagement of tax revenue by public officials, because sometimes the government do not properly, account, for the taxpayers' money or the amount, they have collected, of which not sometimes they may end up, embezzle it or steal, the taxpayers' money instead, for them, to use it, in executing, developmental projects. So they end up, squandering, the money. So which, that is like it really erodes taxpayers, trust or the confidence, the taxpayers they have, in government. And that's what makes the taxpayers sometimes as to engage, in what? In tax evasion. So that they will end up, evading tax. And then the next one is for use of funds. It also erodes taxpayers' trust. And then the next one is conflict of interest. And how does this conflict of interest emanate? It emanates where tax practitioners representing clients and at the same time having personal stake in decision. Because at the same time, it's like they're just trying to, advocate, for their taxpayers. Because, they don't want, their taxpayers, to suffer much, for the taxes or for the amount, of tax, they pay. So, and they too, at the same time, they will be aiming at, what they will collect, as the fee, for the professional services they offer to their clients. And so that's how the conflict of interest, it emanates. And the next one is the professional misconduct. And how does this professional misconduct emanate? That is failure of tax practitioners to adhere to professional code of ethics. So, of which, I believe all these professional bodies, like, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, the Association of National Accountants of Nigeria, the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, they all have code of ethics. So, of which, the code of ethics, that has been adopted by these three professional bodies I have just highlighted. So, it's like the code is, what we call fundamental principles, which was, given or provided by IPAC, that is International Federation of Accountants. So, like, the principle of integrity, principle of objectivity, principle of confidentiality, professional, competence and due care, professional behavior or technical standard. You see, so all these are the code of ethics that the members are expected, to strictly, adhere to while, discharging their professional, services. So, and then we have unethical tax planning. And how does this ethical, tax planning, emanate? Sometimes, as a taxpayer, if you want to, manage, your tax, properly, so you need to properly, plan it, like to identify, the taxes that you ought to pay, or remit, to Federal Inland Revenue Service, the one that you ought to pay to State Board of Internal Revenue Service, the one that you ought to pay to, local government revenue, as the case may be. local government revenue, as the case may be. So in that case, it's like, you need to, properly plan, for the tax. But sometimes while planning, for the tax, it's like they exploit, what loopholes aggressively, so which, it will result in the loss of, the government revenue. So even if maybe while, planning, for the tax, so in that case, the taxpayer or the tax practitioner should not, exploit, the loopholes aggressively. You understand? Because like we said, it's something, that can even raise, ethical issue. Because, government, losing, might end up, significantly, losing, revenue. So because of, the action, of the taxpayer or that of the tax practitioner. And then we also have, uh, so it's like basically, these are some of the ethical issues, in the Nigerian tax system. So let us quickly look at, some ethical principles for the tax practitioners. So what are the ethics or code of ethics, that guide, the behavior or the action, of the tax practitioners? Number one, we have the integrity, we have the objectivity, we have the professional competence and due care, we have the confidentiality, and then we have the professional behavior. So let's start, with the first one. Integrity, principle of integrity says that, all tax practitioners should be straightforward and honest in all their dealings. So they have to be honest. So it's not only the tax practitioners, even, the taxpayers themselves, they need to be honest. That is by declaring an accurate, income. So they shouldn't, falsify, their records, just, for them, to evade tax. So that is, to be, straightforward and honest in all their dealings. And then the next one is objectivity. So if you're talking about the principle of objectivity, is being unbiased. Is being unbiased, isn't it? So especially, for the tax practitioner, they shouldn't, side or sided, with their client more, isn't it? Just, for them not to pay tax. You understand? So it's like, the tax practitioners are expected to maintain kind of, neutrality. They should be neutral, isn't it? They should be in between of the taxpayers and the government. And then we have the professional competence and due care. So for the professional competence and due care is like the tax practitioners are expected, to maintain, knowledge and the skills for them, to be up to date. Like if you take this taxation is something that is dynamic. It changes with these changes, that we have with this new tax reform act, we have. So it's like everybody is starting, with afresh. So in that case, as a tax practitioner, so you have to make sure that you thoroughly understand, these new tax laws, so that you can properly, guide, your client. Because, if you do not properly understand these new tax laws, you may end up, misleading your tax, your client. So in that case, we have to be updating our knowledge. So this is a duty, on us as a professional. And then confidentiality. So any information, we gather or any information, we assist or we have in the course of carrying out our professional assignment. So in that case, we cannot disclose such information, to the third party, except if we have gotten the consent, of the client. And we shouldn't use such information, for our own, personal, advantage. So we shouldn't just use it for our own personal gain. So if we want to use any information that we get, in the course of carrying out our professional work, so in that case, we have to ask for the consent, of the client, even though sometimes, we have a duty, you understand, to report, you understand, especially if we find out that, the taxpayer, is engaged